Let's get going. Okay, so I'm Ivan Baranov.
I'm Robyn Abakumov.
And this is part 2 of our lectures on the history of the English language. Today we'll be talking about Old English. There is no such thing as a first instance of the English language, but we will look at the first trace of what we can today call English, language called Old English. First, we have to talk about the history that led to that language existing in the first place. In our last lecture, we talked about the Celtic peoples that inhabited the British Isles and the Romans that took it from them and conquered what we today know as England. We'll start with where we ended our last lecture, the fall of Rome. By the start of the 5th century, the Roman Empire was this hot pot of different influential leaders that all wanted to proclaim themselves emperors. And one of them, in the year 407, was a man named Constantine III. He was a general in the Roman province of Britannia, which loosely lines up to modern-day England. And he proclaimed himself emperor and took the Roman army out of the province of Britannia. Immediately after that, everything collapsed. The entire province turned into a bunch of kingdoms led by warlords. And at the same time, a Celtic people known as the Picts invaded the province of Britannia. And the warlords had to figure out, how do we defend ourselves against these Pict people? And the state of affairs would cause a period known as the Anglo-Saxon period to begin. In 450 AD, one of these warlords, a king named Vortigern, invited people called the Anglo-Saxons to help him defend his lands against Pictish invasions in exchange for land. 3 specific groups came to Vortigern's aid. The Jutes, the Angles, and the Saxons. And these 3 specific groups came from modern-day Denmark and northwest Germany, and they all spoke the same language, slightly different dialects, but all spoke what we today call Old English. They were led by 2 brothers named Hengist and Horsa, and yeah. So Hengist and Horsa and the Anglo-Saxons in the year 450 AD traveled to the southernmost point of England and settled there with the help of Vortigern. Eventually, Vortigern went back on his promise of giving them land in exchange for defense, and the Anglo-Saxons attacked him. And this quickly escalated into a war that encompassed all of England, which by the year 500, by the year 500, the Anglo-Saxons won that war and formed a system known as the Heptarchy. Hepta, 7 kingdoms. These 7 kingdoms were the one founded by Hengist and Horsa, Kent, the 3 kingdoms founded by the Saxons, Wessex, Sussex, and Essex, and 3 kingdoms founded by the Angles, Mercia, East Anglia, and Northumbria. And all of these kingdoms spoke one language called Old English.
Too fast. Old English. I'm going to go back a slide because I don't want you to see that just yet. Old English is a Germanic language, belongs to the Germanic family. We talked about various language families that exist all over the world. In the previous lecture, I mentioned a major language family. Does anybody remember what it is, if you read the previous lecture? Or if you read any of my other lectures? Indo-European languages. They don't include all Indian languages, and they don't include all European languages, but they include most of them. And this very big language family, includes a lot of different languages. We would know, is this a bad marker?
Yeah, it's a bad marker.
Apologies. Sorry. This is unfortunate. Indo-European languages, they include a lot of different language families. For example, the Celtic languages, the ones we talked about last time, and the Germanic languages, the ones we'll talk about today, and also all the language families we'll talk about in future lectures. Indo-European languages. There probably exist bigger language families than that, but we can't trace them as easily because we don't have a lot of reference from them. Indo-European language, the ancestor of all of them, it's called Proto-Indo-European. We can only reconstruct it. We have no written evidence of it, at least none we have discovered so far. So we can only reconstruct it based on all the languages that we know we've spoken around it, all the similarities we can find in them. And we'll talk about a little bit about language reconstruction later on. There might exist bigger language families than that, like ancestors of different proto-languages, but we have no evidence for that happening. We just know that most likely that existed. Now, a major language family within them is the Germanic languages. They have emerged right around here in modern day Germany and Denmark, and they have spread around like this. We have, in blue colors, we have Celtic languages, just so that you remember what we talked about last time, two major language families. By this point, by 600 AD, I mentioned earlier that there existed other other subfamilies of Celtic on the continent that don't exist anymore. They have stopped existing by this point. I've mentioned Gaulish, I talked a lot about Gaulish. It's not here on this map anymore. Now, the Germanic languages, they have spread quite a lot. There's three main families: Northern Germanic, Western Germanic, and Eastern Germanic. Eastern Germanic does not matter at all whatsoever. They're going to go extinct eventually. The last one is actually the Crimean Eastern Germanic language. It went extinct like 200 years ago at most. These are the ones that have spread all over the place to go extinct much earlier. These two matter a lot to us. Old English is a Western Germanic language. You'll see there are several different, can you see this well? Okay, there are several different languages within Western Germanic. We have Old High German, Old Saxon, Frankish, Frisian, and Old English, the main five. They will later split into five different families within Germanic languages. So over here we'll have High German languages. That's a lot of, that's Standard German, and also a lot of different dialects of it. And that raises an interesting question of whether they're considered dialects or languages. Do you know what's the difference between dialects and languages? Mutual intelligibility. If two people who speak different languages can understand each other, they are usually called dialects. And by understand each other, I mean understand each other flawlessly. Not you can pick out most of the words and kind of guess what they mean, but actually have mutual understanding. So those would be dialects. And then languages, if you can't mutually understand each other, or can do it that well. Do you know what's the problem with that definition? Something you like, I'll tell you, you're like, yes, that sounds like a problem. There are some languages within, will be dialect A, who can understand dialect B who can understand dialect C who can understand dialect D, but dialect A and D cannot understand each other at all whatsoever. Those are languages like English and Arabic that have so many dialects that many of them are not mutually intelligible within the same language. That is beside the point, however. We have five languages from here, language families, subfamilies. We have the High German, the Low German, that's just one language. We have Low Franconian, that's modern day Dutch. And then we have Anglo-Frisian languages, which we then split into Analytic languages, that's English and Scots. English and Scots are both descendants of Old English. And we'll look at that in much later lectures, where they will actually diverge, because they haven't done that yet, and they will not do that during the course of this lecture. And then we have Frisian languages scattered over here. Let's see. Now, an important, have I talked about this last lecture? I'll talk about it again anyway. Just want to let you, like, somebody remembers things about this. There are several ways to categorize languages. And one of the major ways it's done is by something called morphology. Morphology is the way you take several units of meanings. The smallest unit of meaning in a language is called a morpheme. So for example, in the word freedom, there are two morphemes, free and a dom. Dom on its own is not a word, free is, but both of those are morphemes because dom modifies the meaning of the word free. And morphology is the study of how different morphemes string together in different languages. So in most Indo-European languages, so this entire green thing over here, those are Indo-European languages. These green languages are Semitic languages. And that's also true for Semitic languages, but we'll not talk about them. But for most Indo-European languages, there's something called fusional. That's when you have a lot of morphemes and they fuse together and they take on many different meanings. So most of you speak Russian. Russian is an example of a fusional language because instead of relying heavily on prepositions and articles and other words like that, a lot of information is just piled into one word. For example, the ending of a word can tell you whether it's first person, second person, or third person. Like if it's a verb, it can tell you if it's first person, second, or third person. If it's future tense or past tense or present tense, can tell you whether it's one person doing it or multiple people doing this word, and so on. And that all is hidden in just one, maybe two indexes there. Don't realize heavily on prefixes and suffixes, those like little parts of the word before the word. Like, I don't know, fusional is an example of a word where you like have several morphemes fused together. You have the root fuse, the suffix jan, and the suffix al. That's an example of a fusional word in English, but in English it was incredibly rare. In English we do not have very complicated systems of endings of words modifying the meaning of the word. We mostly rely on prepositions and articles telling us what's happening. And I'll show you in a second what this looks like. We have, that makes English analytic. And you'll notice that the only analytic languages on here are Germanic languages. And there is a reason for that. And that reason is much more complicated than you would assume. Agglutinative is similar to fusional. You see they're both under the same category. Just in agglutinative, the parts of the word they're strung together in a row. In fusional, they fuse together, so one little suffix can have multiple meanings onto it. For example, it can tell you both the tense and the person. Does that make sense? I can explain it in more depth if necessary. Polysynthetic is just like a language that's aggressively agglutinative, and that's just on this map. That's just Greenland. Thank you. That's just Greenland, because Greenlandic is a Native American language, and those are usually polysynthetic. Now, let me show you what it means for languages to be fusional by the example of Old English, because Old English, as all Germanic languages over a millennia ago, all of them were fusional. They had something called, for example, case system. Are you familiar with cases? All right, I'll still explain them. So a case is how you modify a noun, for example, in order to contribute more information about this noun. So, for example, in English, we don't have it with nouns, but we have it with pronouns. For example, we have, I don't know, I, me, my. So those are cases of a pronoun in a way. I is something called the subject of a sentence. That's the person who is doing the actions. Like if I'll say, yeah, I am doing something. This is something as generic as this, I am doing something. I is the subject, I is the one doing the thing. If something is instead being done to me, see how I change it? I didn't say being done to I, that will make sense to any of us. I say being done to me. In that case, me becomes the object, because I'm not doing anything, I'm an object, I'm just chilling. People are doing something to me. You have subject, object. And then you have the possessive. That's when you possess something, have something as possession. So those are the three cases that English has for pronouns. Do you know which one of these cases it actually also has for nouns? The possessive case. When we add an apostrophe s at the end of the word, that's us adding a suffix, that's us modifying a word. So technically, we have nominative. That nominative means the same thing as the thing I'm talking about is the subject. Nominative. I'll put I in parentheses so that you can. That's when you have a subject. And I know that's a lot of terminology, but there is a reason I am explaining it all of it right now. So nominative I is the subject. We have genitive. That's mine. Genitive, like generate, that comes from like when you make something. That's the parental case, or when you like own something in a way. That's the etymology of the word. So genitive, that's possessive, and then the other one we only have for pronouns. That's the accusative. As in, I accuse someone, I accuse me, I accuse them, I accuse you. Now, Old English had these and another one. I'll show you an example of that. So the nominative case, I cooked something, right? The word that's bolded, that's the word which you're looking at now. Now, if I cooked soup, soup is the word that's in the accusative in this sentence. I is the object, soup is the subject. Now, there is something really cool And this is a really rare case. It exists in very few languages. It exists in Russian. It's the dative case. It's the indirect object. I cooked them soup. So I'm cooking soup, but I'm also doing something to them. Them is also the object, but it's not a direct object. I'm doing something to someone. I cook for them. I give someone something, like I give you a gift. That's also the dative. And an example of distinction, because English doesn't distinguish between accusative and dative. So if I had the sentence, I cooked them becomes the direct object. I'm cooking them for whatever reason. And in Old English, these are two different words. Because this is the accusative, this is the dative. Sorry, this is the dative, this is the accusative. But in modern English, same word. And then the genitive, I cooked them our favorite soup. I did that so that you can see all four kinds of cases in here. Any questions about this? So a pretty neat system.
Yes, I have a question. Yeah. Line number 4 is accusative again.
Yeah, accusative. I didn't want to write this. Yeah, but yeah, that's a good question. This is the accusative in this case. So a pretty complicated case system, and I know a lot of people whose first language is English, when they try learning a different language that has cases, whether it be Latin or Finnish or literally a lot of European languages, we find cases very counterintuitive. They're counterintuitive in the same sense that pronouns would be counterintuitive to somebody learning English if they have never heard of a distinction between I, me, and my, and they just always knew the word I, and that's it. And like a language like that could exist in theory, and if a person spoke that language as a native language, they would find English pronouns very confusing in the same sense that native English speakers find cases very confusing. But they're not to the people who actually speak those languages. So why did we lose all of this? Does anybody have any idea why this could have happened?
Efficiency?
Efficiency. That's actually a really good reason for why all language changes ever. If I'm ever rambling on for too long, let me know so that I'll give them to talk about it. There is two kinds of efficiency. There is execution efficiency. A lot of people who teach linguistics, they like to describe this as laziness. They like to describe, oh, people are doing this just because they're lazy. I don't like saying that, but if you like that formulation better, feel free to use that. So there is the execution efficiency, and then there is comprehension efficiency. So yes, you want to simplify the way you speak, and that's something our brain does naturally. It naturally looks for patterns and finds sounds that sound similar and groups them together, because otherwise we will never be able to learn even our first language if our brain had to think through every single thing that we ever say, every single thing we ever hear. We have to find the patterns, we have to group things together, and that's what efficiency does. And what that causes to happen is that language changes over time. It's a process that cannot be prevented. There are a lot of pardon me, snobs who are very particular about the people you say certain words, which in some contexts that's very important, but for the general public, if you're like talking to somebody and they say a word slightly different and you correct them, that is usually a bit ridiculous, because no matter how many times you correct people, languages will always change, and you will also contribute to this change, because you will also naturally change the way you speak without even realizing it. That's how languages have always changed. The other one, comprehension efficiency, that also plays a really big role. And I will mention that later. I will mention that later, how those two play their roles. But yes, that's right. It's easier to just get rid of these complicated endings and say, I cook soup the same, like saying I cook them soup the same way I say I cook them. That's easier. My question now is, why do you think that has only happened in Germanic languages?
Say it again?
Why do you think this has only, like, do you have an idea why this could have possibly only happened in Germanic languages? The fact that we lost all the cases, because all the other Indo-European languages who had very similar case systems, they all maintained theirs, but Germanic lost theirs.
They are the most lazy? The laziest.
That's a good perspective to have on this. Actually, no, it's not a good perspective, because all people are equally efficient. I'm going to say efficient instead of lazy. Yeah.
I mean, this is complete shot in the dark, but maybe it's because there was a merging of multiple languages, and so they sort of took the common denominator in a sense and did that, but I don't know.
That's a really good guess. That's actually something that happened with the French. But with Germanic languages are the ones that evolved. Germanic languages, that's one of the most interesting features that have very strong emphasis on the beginning of each word, on the very first syllable. Very strong emphasis on every syllable like that. And the other syllables matter a little bit less. So that's why over time in languages such as English, we had certain sounds drop from the end, like the silent E. That's why we have the silent E in English. Because it mattered so little, because there was so much emphasis on the beginning of the word, that they got dropped eventually. But before that has happened, back in the times of Old English, that's how all the case endings got dropped, because they weren't emphasized enough. That's a similar thing has happened with French. French isn't a Germanic language, but as we talked last time, that area used to be inhabited by the Franks, that's hence the name. Franks were a Germanic people, and that's why they have so many silent letters at the end of all of their words.
Okay, but did we answer the question why it happened to?
Specifically because Germanic languages had this interesting feature. All languages have different rules for how emphasis is done in their language, and Germanic languages just happen to have this rule that it's done on the first syllable, and it's very important that it's done.
Oh, that's the only reason?
That is the primary reason, yes. Off the top of my head, Celts didn't have a strong influence. The French influence later on also would have a very, also reinforce this, but yes, that's the primary reason. All right. I was gonna talk about a few other things, but I'll do that later. So this is the alphabet in which Old English was written. It's called Futhorc because of the first 6 letters of that alphabet. It wasn't called Futhorc back then. That's what historians have named it since. I'll show you. I'm gonna skip that.
It's basically like if we called the Latin alphabet QWERTY.
I was thinking.
Well, that's like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's like if we called the Greek alphabet alphabet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is what it looked like. Some of these are a little misleading, so I'll explain that. We have Futhorc, the first 6 letters. We have Fe, which represented, and it didn't represent the F and the W sound the same way we sometimes have letters representing different sounds. This used to be the same sound in Old English. There was no distinction between that at all whatsoever. Not in the sense that they pronounced them the same, but they pronounced them differently, but interpreted them as the same sound. We have this in modern English as well. In modern English there is 5 different ways in which we all pronounce the sound T, but we just don't interpret them as 5 different ways. Yeah.
What are the columns?
The columns
in this table?
Yes. This is the name of the letter. This is what that name means, because all the letters used to have names. The same way alpha, beta, gamma also all mean something. And these are the sounds that they make. I'll explain this in a second. Yeah. So the same way in modern English we pronounce T in many different ways. My favorite example that is one I use is if you take the words stop and stop and you say them out loud with your hand over here, you'll notice that one of them releases much more air than the other. That's an example of how the T makes different sounds in English. And we don't really think about it when we do it. But there are languages such as, for example, Hindi, where that plays a crucial role. If you use one of those letters, one of those sounds instead of the other, this could totally change the meaning. This is a similar thing here. Even though in our language, if you switch between F and V, that will change the meaning of the word sometimes. In Old English, it did not matter which one you used. You would just sound a little weird if you used one instead of the other. It would sound like you have an accent. So this colon means a long vowel. So all the vowels represent both the short vowel and the long vowel. The long vowel is not the vowel length, it's more of the vowel complexity. Like A and A, those are different lengths of the same vowel. So thorn, this is the TH sound, the silent one as in think, and the voiced one as in the da. So long vowel, this is actually also a little bit misleading. Because this is not the R that we have in English, that's the R that most languages have. When people say you roll your R's, the R sound, this is the one that all English used to have. This is the Ch, this is the H sound, it also used to be G and H. All of these diverge later. This one is a H sound, like in Russian or in the modern Scottish dialect. This is a really weird sound that doesn't exist in many languages, it's a H. And all of those, this is the same sound as there. This means Y. It's confusing, it's written as a J, but in most languages it means Y, so that's the
International.
Yeah, that's the international way of writing it. So this is a weird one. Only after Latin influence, and I will talk about Latin influence later, this was added after Latin influence specifically to represent the X sound in Latin languages before the Latin alphabet would be adopted. Now these are also the same sound back at the time. So this is, I think the last letter, this last sound of the word sing, ng. This is the sound and the and this is an I sound. It looks like a Y, but it's an I sound. Questions about any of these? Or anything you see on this slide, or anything I've talked about so far, before I move on?
Why some sounds are repeating?
Why some sounds? For the same reason we have in English. We sometimes have different letters representing the same exact sound. For example, the first sound in the word about is the same sound as, I don't know, this sound in the word final. This is something called a schwa, and this sound is the same exact here. In fact, it's represented by all 6 vowels in the English alphabet. All of them can represent that sound in some of the words, and sometimes that sound is represented by no letters at all. Like in the word rhythm, between the V and the M, there is the schwa sound in there. Similar story here. Originally, when this alphabet was adopted, when they came up with it, every single letter represented different sounds. But then things started mixing, things started changing, and it's a really good question. I'll talk about this more a little bit later on when we talk about the alphabets in greater depth.
It's like how there's words like king and carriage. King is spelled with a K, carriage with a C. And
Exactly.
they're different letters, but they make the same
That's a
sound.
much better example than I used. I couldn't think of that off the top of my head. Thank you. Does that? Yeah. All right. Now I'll show you an example of Futhorc. This is something called the Frank's casket. It's named after Franks, who is the guy who had this in his collection, which I think is incredibly stupid. I think they could have found a better name for it. But that's the name we are stuck with. This casket had the excerpts from a tale about a particular hero in their mythology, except for one side. One side just had a random riddle on it, and we aren't really certain why it did that. The riddle, this is the Futhorc. This is the transcription of what it would sound like. And you can see this language being fusional, because look how words these are. You wouldn't see this in English. Look how many English words we need to say the exact same thing here. This is 6 words, this is a lot. So, fisk, that's fish over here. Flodu, that is a verb that means to be like carried by a flood. And then onto a mountain cliff, that's one word. We're changing the ending to modify the case so that we know that, because we just said fish and mountain cliff, wouldn't make sense. Fish, specific case ending, that means that we're thrown onto a mountain cliff, makes sense. So 3 words, this long sentence, and then the terror king, that's this person over here, became sad, that's also one word. And now where he swam on the shingle, that's this monstrosity, and these words like where, he, and swam are all signified by the endings over there. And we'll again look at that a little bit later. The premise of the riddle, like the way to interpret it is, there was a flood, a flood cast a fish onto the mountain cliff, and then this fish is the terror king who became sad by the fact that he was cast onto the mountain cliff. And you have to just figure out what it is. The answer is right here, it's also on this box. These are the letters, by the way. There is a picture in the middle, and then these are the letters. The answer is whale's bone. I wouldn't be able to answer this riddle if somebody like just wrote this for me. But yeah, this is something that made sense in the past. Now, another beautiful thing that we want to look at is Beowulf. Beowulf is perhaps the most famous Old English text. The reason it's the most famous one is because it's the oldest one that we have uncovered so far. We don't know exactly when it was written. It was written somewhere between 700 and 1000 AD. We know when it was published together in a large collection. We have a grand total of 400 texts recovered from Old English. And the 4 major ones, they're called the codices. One of them, it was the Novel's Codex. It included this poem in there, but we know that this poem was written prior to that. We don't know by how much. There are many ways we can figure that out. We can use carbon dating, even though it's not the most accurate way of doing that. Sorry, not the most precise way of doing that. We can look at other written records. We can compare it to all the Middle English texts we had and all the more recent ones we had, so we can reconstruct the whole timeline of texts. Because this would be really difficult to decipher and figure out anything about it on its own, but because we have 1,000 years worth of history of English texts, we can do that. Does anybody notice anything interesting about this text?
What alphabet did we just talk about?
Yeah.
We talked about Futhorc.
It's not
Futhorc.
It's not written in Futhorc. Thank you. Thank you for noticing that. This is the Latin alphabet. So I will talk about this in a moment. But this is the Latin alphabet when it got adopted by the Old English and it got accustomed to Old English. It was changed in a way that would work. So this is the same exact thing. Like this is the H. This letter right here, because Latin didn't have a letter called W, so they just used the Old English letter. I'll write it like this, so that it's easier for you to understand. Because this looks like a P, and that's inconvenient. And then everything else is pretty much the same. You will see this the sound over here. And what we're going to do now is we're going to try to analyze it, try to decode it. Let me know if you see any word under here that you can probably guess the meaning of. And there's not a lot of such words. But if you want to really decipher this, you would have to look at all the other texts that we have from like now to the point this was written. So this is impossible if I just give you this inside have like do whatever you want with it. But I want you to guess at least a couple of words. Yeah.
The last word, is that cunning?
That's a good guess. It isn't. But it is similar to our modern English word of king. That's something you could guess. Do you see this word anywhere else in here?
Part of the word on the second one.
Yes. So that's another thing with Old English being fusional. Words will combine together. This means clan kings, and this means of clan kings. So OF, clan kings. It's good observation.
What about, this is low-hanging fruit, but the scold thingy, is that like literally scolding, or does that mean something completely different? Like scald, for instance, or something else?
That's, I wouldn't say that's low-hanging fruit, primarily because none of these are low-hanging fruit, but
Often.
yeah. Let's see. It's not quite close. It's a good guess. Yeah. Oft is often. That's right, yeah. There is another low-hanging fruit. It's the first line. Can you find it?
Yeah, da, boom, that's the low-hanging fruit.
Well, how about Gardena?
Gardena. Yep.
I think like the first part is like we Gardena, as in like we some people.
We, yeah. That's we. I was hoping somebody would guess that.
The second to last one is God.
Everybody was rage baiting.
I know.
This one, good guess. It is related to God etymologically, but no, it's not. This line is actually the easiest one to guess. Can somebody say this out loud? I remember this is the thorn. This is the TH sound.
Paved, right?
That.
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 That was God.
That was
What's this word that sounds really similar to, spelled really similar to God?
good.
That was a good king. Yes, that's the last line. So this, the entire poem about Beowulf is about Beowulf. Beowulf means be wolf, which is a really interesting thing that a lot of Old English and Old Norse poems did. Is they, instead of giving a character a normal name, they made their names into sort of riddles. They really liked riddles in Old English, which I respect a lot. Beowulf means bear, because wolf is somebody who hunts for something, and somebody who hunts for bears is a bear, because he actually looks for the honey. And this passage over here is just the premise of the story. It's describing the father, the king who is the father of Beowulf. Do you want me to? I'll translate everything for you because we don't have enough time. We have less time than enough to walk through this. So this means what? You know how a lot of people of certain dialects pronounce words like what, like what? Yeah, that's where it came from. It used to be very literally what. So what in this case means listen, or like as in I'm about to tell you something really cool, and then this is the cool thing that they tell them. So Gardana means Gar means spear, and Dana means Danes. So those spear Danes. Those are the fictional characters within this poem. In Ger Dagum, so Ger means your, Dagum, like Deum means day. So your day means days of your, and this ending you'll see this in other parts as well. It's the case that happens in front after prepositions. So for example, over here we have threatum, that means enemies. You can see the word threat, and then this ending that specifies the case. Monogam mathum, that means many people. See that in this case it doesn't only impact the noun, but also the word many. Let's see, anything else interesting to point out, because I don't want to talk about all of it. Let's see.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So Gardena, is that where guard came from, or is that related at all to it, or no?
Actually, that's a really good question. Because guard, because this is a fictional thing, but guard means spear, and spear is a weapon. So I actually don't know if guard comes from.
Like I even know that like in Ireland they call it the Garda, right? It's like I'm just curious.
Yeah.
If it,
I think that comes from the word lord, as in W-A-R-D, which used to mean
yeah,
guard.
yeah, no, that makes sense.
But actually, that's a good question because I don't know off the top of my head. I'll have to look into that. And on this, are there any more questions about anything I've talked about? Because I know I've provided a lot of information right now. If you think of more questions, you can ask me later. I'm giving the floor back to
Okay.
Ivan.
And before we end off the Old English section, I would like to say that what Robyn failed to mention is that Old English is responsible for so many of the words in our language. Around a third of all English words are Old English words, but 80% of the words we use in an everyday conversation, like if we're just talking normally to people, 80% of those are Old English words. So here's I just have a giant list. There's stuff like body parts, arm, ear, foot, hair, jaw, heart. That's Old English. Family, father, mother, daughter, son, wife. That's Old English. Cat, dog, sheep, fish, pig. Old English. Land, stone, wood, sun, sky, hill. All of those words are Old English. So if a word sounds basic, there's a very, very good chance it's an Old English word. And now I'd like to go back to Beowulf.
There are exceptions to that, and I'll talk about them.
Yes, there are
in another
exceptions,
section.
but just
I
like a
was
general
trying to
rule
go
of
to the
thumb,
next section, but yeah, thank you for bringing it up.
a lot of very simple words are Old English. Okay. As Robyn pointed out, Beowulf is written. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry, guys. As Robyn pointed out, Beowulf is written in Latin. Didn't the Anglo-Saxons have their own alphabet? Futhorc? I'm sorry. Futhorc? How did the alphabet of a people that the Anglo-Saxons fought and destroyed, the Romans, become the alphabet that its most famous text, Beowulf, uses? The answer is one man, or the actions of one man, Pope Gregory the Great. A legend has it that Pope Gregory once saw a group of Anglo-Saxon slaves in the markets of Rome, and seeing their long blonde hair and exquisite beards thought, we have to convert these people to Christianity. And in 595, sorry, just point out Beowulf is written between this like general period. So yeah, in 595, before Beowulf is written, Pope Gregory sends a man named St. Augustine to try to convert the Anglo-Saxons to Christianity, with Augustine landing in the kingdom of Kent. Kent's king had recently married a Christian princess, and so St. Augustine had basically no trouble converting Kent's king to Christianity. And Kent's king also granted him a plot of land in the Kentish capital of Canterbury, where St. Augustine built Canterbury Cathedral, which is the oldest and most important cathedral in all of England, and it is today the center of the Church of England. And Augustine's followers would then convert the rest of the Anglo-Saxon kings to Christianity. The alphabet of Western Christianity is Latin, and so when the Anglo-Saxons adopted Christianity, they started writing Old English with the Latin alphabet instead of Futhorc. And so by the time Beowulf was written sometime, that's a different slide. And so by the time Beowulf was written in the 8th to 11th centuries, Latin had already entrenched itself in Old English. This is why we know that it's written between that period, because it's written between the Latin alphabet becoming the main alphabet of Old English, and the time that it was published. So yeah, the change in alphabet is how we define when Beowulf was written, and the rest of the Anglo-Saxon texts that are written in Latin. And what's really interesting about the alphabet of the Latin alphabet and Futhorc is that they're related, and I'll hand it back to.
Happy birthday. Yeah. This will not be a look section. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Almost all alphabets. An alphabet is any writing system. Okay, there are many ways to define it, but an alphabet is usually a writing system that relies on sounds. Right? There are writing systems that are called logographic writing systems. That's where they rely on ideas. That's where you have hieroglyphics and things like that. But when a writing system primarily or entirely relies on sounds, that's usually an alphabet. So each symbol doesn't have inherent meaning, but it represents a sound. Almost all of those derive from the same alphabet, the Phoenician alphabet, which I will not talk about because that happened a really long time ago. And what's important to note is that the writing systems don't have anything to do with the language. I'm phrasing this wrong. Writing systems and languages aren't entirely related. So all of these alphabets could have been used by very different writing systems. For example, Phoenician, that was a Semitic language, and the alphabet that derived from that is used for English, which is an Indo-European language. Stuff like that happens. But writing systems, once they're adopted, they begin modifying the way people think about their language. And it's really interesting the way it does it, because we learn to speak, like when language first emerged, it was entirely spoken, and it was a very long time until an alphabet or any writing system appeared. And then when we learn a language, you always learn to speak it first and only then learn to write it. Yet despite this fact, the writing system that we use for language very frequently dictates the way people think about languages. And that's very interesting, because the best example is when people talk about words being pronounced and spelled differently, they say that this word is pronounced wrong, but they'll very infrequently say that it's spelled wrong, even though writing systems are supposed to represent the way we speak. There are other examples of these beliefs that people have about language, which I will not go to. But the relation, we have Phoenician, very, very far down the line we have Greek. Greek split into Etruscan, and didn't split yet, it became Etruscan, and Etruscan split into Latin and Elder Futhorc. Most likely, there is a possibility that Etruscan actually, Etruscan was an old Italic alphabet, turned into Latin, then Latin turned into Elder Futhorc. That could have happened, or it could have been split like this. We still haven't figured it out. And then Elder Futhorc, that was the Germanic alphabet that was written on continental Germanic tribes, split into Younger Futhorc and Futhorc. The reason why this is Futhorc is because alphabets change, they modify, and the letter that in this language used to represent an A sound, in this language represents an O sound. So this is the alphabet that's used by North Germanic languages, that's Old Norse. Yeah, at the time there was only one North Germanic language, it was Old Norse, that later split into Danish, Swedish, Norwegian, Icelandic, and so on. And then Futhorc was spoken by Old English, used to represent Old English. And there is a reason I'm talking about Old Norse, and you'll see that in a bit. But for now, I want to compare these alphabets. We have Latin is written in a weird order because I want to primarily focus on Elder Futhorc. Latin is either the sister alphabet of Elder Futhorc or the parent alphabet of the Elder Futhorc. You see that these symbols over here, they're kind of similar. An interesting thing that happened with Younger Futhorc, and that really ties into like how Old Norse and Old English evolved differently, is that a lot of the letters were dropped over here. There's only 16 letters in this alphabet, whereas in this one we have around 24. And in Futhorc we had even more, we have 28 letters. Not all of them represented here. And you remember the ones, if you remember back to the original slide with the Futhorc alphabet, we had several letters that looked just like this, with like slight differences that represent different vowels. That's one of the things. A few of those letters also split into different letters along the line. The sounds that they represent have also changed. For example, over here we have, so this used to be a G sound over here, derived from the either Latin G or the Etruscan G. And then this one used to be a G sound over here, derived from the Latin G. And then this one used to be a G sound over here, derived from the Latin G. And then this one used to be a G sound over here, derived from the Latin G. And then this one used to be a G sound over here, derived from the Latin G. And then this one used to be a G sound over here, derived from the Latin G. And then this one used to be a G sound over here, derived from the Latin G. And then this one used to be a G sound over here, derived from the Latin G. And then this one used to be a G sound over here, derived from the Latin G. And then this one used to be a G sound over here, derived from the Latin G. And then this one used to be a G sound over here, derived from the Latin G. And then this one used to be a G sound over here, derived from the Latin G. And then this one used to be a G sound over here, derived from the Latin G. And then this one used to be a G sound over here, derived from the Latin G. And then And you can even tell that it's kind of, a lot of these are kind of similar. Like this one over here, it's like if you write your G's sloppily enough, like this is a proper G, this is an improper G, and then this is just whatever we get over here. This has then later also diverged onto different letters. Over here it's a Y sound, over here it's actually an H sound, and there's a reason I'm bringing up this letter in particular. In a little, see, in a little, should I talk about it right now? Should I talk about it?
No.
Okay, we will not. A lot of these letters also travel similar paths. For example, over here, you see that some letters rotate after a while. For example, we have an A over here. The letter A has rotated so much throughout history. When it was first invented, it looked like this. Its name was Aleph, and it represented an ox's head. That's what the name of the letter meant, Aleph. And it actually represented the, not even an A sound, it represented a glottal stop, which is a very weird sound in English. Like, for example, the word A-O, or if you're trying to imitate a British person, you say British, that's the sound that you're replacing T with in there. And then that letter changed sound so many times into all of these things, and then it has also rotated several times. It rotated like this, then it rotated like this again, so the sticks moved around. It's really interesting how alphabets change. And yes, this is the main point. And what I want you to know is that despite the fact that both Old Norse and Old English are very closely related, and they change in many similar ways, there are many distinctions, and one of those distinctions is the way Old Norse got rid of a lot of letters, while Old English piled on a few new ones. I'll talk about that once we get to the Old Norse section, and now it's back to you.
Okay. Okay, let's talk about Danish toponymy afterwards.
Yes, I will.
Okay.
Yes, I will.
Okay. So let's take a look at this alphabet and language here. Younger Futhorc and the language of Old Norse. Who used that? Do you guys know? Yes, the Norse. Who are the Norse? The Norse are the Vikings, who would become the namesake of a period in English history known as the Viking Age. This period would begin with the first Viking raid, which came in the year 793 on a small island called Lindisfarne. Lindisfarne was a small island off the coast of the kingdom of Northumbria, and it had a very rich monastery on it. And in the year 793, the Norse Vikings would attack the island of Lindisfarne. They would raid it and kill all of its people. And this would be the first incident in a 70-year period of continuous Viking raids. The Vikings got tired of raiding eventually, however, and in the year 865, they assembled a huge army and sailed for England. Have you guys ever seen the Netflix show Vikings? You have? Then you should be familiar with the leader of the Viking army, a guy named Ivar the Boneless. There's two theories as to why he's called the Boneless. Either he was so fluid in combat that they felt that as if he didn't have bones because his limbs were just so freely moving, or he had erectile dysfunction. Historians can't really agree. So anyways, this army, which the English called the Great Heathen Army, and the forces they called the Danes. So the Vikings are going to be called the Danes for the rest of this lecture. The Great Heathen Army in the year 865 landed in East Anglia, then moved north, attacked the kingdom of Northumbria, killed its king, and took the capital of York as their own. 2 years later, they would conquer the kingdom of East Anglia, also kill its king. Yeah. The Mercians, seeing their neighbors so soundly defeated, immediately surrendered afterwards, and soon Wessex was left as the only Anglo-Saxon kingdom in all of England. Wessex wasn't completely helpless, however. Since the time of its creation, during the period of early Anglo-Saxon settlement, it had expanded quite considerably to control most of England, most of southern England, and become the most powerful Anglo-Saxon kingdom. And so when the Danes invaded in the year 870, Wessex was ready. And the king of Wessex met the Ivar the Boneless at the Battle of Ashdown, a battle that Wessex won. Then the king of Wessex, Alfred, paid Ivar the Boneless a huge sum of money to leave and go conquer somewhere else. That was weird. Okay. that was weird. The new leader of the Viking army, a man called Guthrum, attacked the Wessex in the year 878, but he was eventually defeated by Alfred in a really cool and long and interesting war that we unfortunately do not have time to talk about. Yeah. In the year 880, the two... That's really annoying. The animation disappeared previously. In the year 880, the two kings would sign a treaty known as the Treaty of Alfred and Guthrum, which stipulated that Guthrum be baptized, with King Alfred becoming his godfather. Most of the Danes followed King Guthrum and also became Christians. The treaty would also establish an official border between Anglo-Saxon and Danish kingdoms in England. This border didn't last long, however. Also, Alfred was named the first king of the Anglo-Saxons, which historians point out as the official start of a united kingdom of England. After both Alfred and Guthrum died, Alfred's son, Edward, conquered the kingdom of Guthrum. Then, finally, in the year 927, Edward's son, Aethelstan, conquered the kingdom of Northumbria, finally uniting England under one king, an Anglo-Saxon king, of the House of Wessex. Despite being conquered, however, much of the Danish culture stayed in the former areas of the Kingdom of Guthrum and the Kingdom of Northumbria. The areas formerly controlled by the Vikings would come to be known as the Danelaw, after the fact that Danish law, Dane law, still applied in there for centuries onwards. A perfect example of the evolution of place names that we see throughout the conquest of the Anglo-Saxons and the Norse is in the capital of the Danelaw, York. York was originally founded by the Celts, who called it Aburkan, or the place of yew trees, which evolved into Everog. The Anglo-Saxons saw Everog and thought it meant Eofor, which is their word for boar. Then they added the suffix wick, or town, Eoforwick. And then when Ivar the Boneless invaded, his Danes took Eoforwick as Eorvik, which turned into Jorvik, which they shortened into York. Then, when Aethelstan conquered York, it was reborrowed back into English with a slightly different spelling of York. So, in a way, the largest city in America, New York, was named by the Vikings. And all of this ties to the language of the Vikings, a language called Old Norse.
You should talk about that.
Okay, yeah. This is a map of all the place names in the island of Britain and where they come from. You can see the blue are Anglo-Saxon names, the red are Celtic names, and the green are Norse. And as you can see, the areas of the former Danelaw are heavily populated by Danish or Norse names, even though they were only controlled by the Danes for like 50 years. And as you can see up here, words like, Grimsby, place names like Grimsby are Danish. Charlesborough would be Saxon, or Southampton would be Saxon, or Berwick upon Tweed is Saxon. Scunthorpe, something like that, is Danish. And Loch Ness, that's Celtic. Yeah.
Kirk.
Kirk means church.
Does it have to be in the end?
It has to be it can be both at the end and at the beginning, or in the middle of the word, but it is more common.
Okay, is Kirkland Danish?
Kirkland? That's a great question. Actually, don't know. we can figure that one out after the lecture.
Named after Peter Kirk, who had a Danish ancestry some time ago.
Well, like the city of Fankirk is a Danish name. But yeah, Old Norse is also a North Germanic language. And yeah. Oh, Viking captains in Yorkshire often named towns after themselves with place names ending in the suffix "ton," like Saxton, Grimston, Carleton, and stuff like that. Anglo-Saxons also adopted a bunch of Danish words. For example, remember how I talked about how 80% of most common words are Anglo-Saxon? The other 20 are mostly Danish. So stuff like egg, leg, husband, here's some more. Sky, window, knife, angst, these are more words now. Maelstrom, walrus, ski, all of those are Norse words. Also, a lot of our linking words, like are, they, have, for, ever, over, under, those are also Danish. But Anglo-Saxon and Danish and Old Norse, as we mentioned previously, are related. So that's why they sound so similar to Anglo-Saxon words. Sorry, 1 second. I'll give it to Robyn to talk about the Viking hypothesis, and then we'll end our lecture.
I'll get to the Viking hypothesis in a... Yeah, sure, I'll start with it. First I want to talk about the reason why Old Norse and Old English have evolved in different ways and then in similar ways at the same time. The reason for that is because when the Old Norse, they have settled into Scandinavia, there was a group of people called Sami that lived there. Sami spoke a non-Indo-European language. They spoke a language of the Uralic family. So that's, remember I showed you a map earlier, and there were a couple of purple blobs on the map? Yeah, those were Uralic languages. That's Finnish, Estonian, Hungarian, and then also Sami in a big part of Sweden and Hungary. And what happened is that the Vikings and the Sami had a much more interesting and much more interdependent relationship with each other than the Celts and the Anglo-Saxons had over here, which is part of the reason because they had better trade, they had their languages mixed much more. Their languages were also more distinct, because Celtic is also an European language, while Sami was entirely unrelated. And on top of that, the Romans have made their way here much earlier, so they had regulated a lot of, not regulated, they have regulated a lot of the alphabet, but they have also had an influence on the way the language changed and also didn't change. Those are like the three main reasons why the Old Norse language has changed much more than Old English has, even though they were the same language from the start, and then they have both moved to these separate pieces of land. And now, after the Danish got here, they have started implementing a lot of changes into English that have happened to them. Let's see, I have interesting. That was a really good list of words. I have a few more words with examples of what they mean. We have scrag became shrag, and this is a very common pattern. This is one of the very few examples where English underwent a change, but Danish did not. Danish, Old Norse, that's the same thing, Old Danish. Where English had a lot of the words change into a sh sound. So, for example, skirt became shirt, or the word scatter became shatter. And then the Vikings came back and they brought back the old words. They brought back the word skirt, they brought back the word scatter, and those have grown to have different meanings. So this is the word church becoming church is the exact same process, because k and g are very difficult sounds to make. That's why they very frequently change into sounds like sh and zh, or ch and j, all over all the languages. And I'll not have time to talk more in depth about that. The agi, which meant terror, became o, because originally awful meant something really bad. And so did awesome. Awesome also meant something really, really bad. But then awesome underwent a semantic change. Same thing happened with the words terrible and terrific. They have swapped meanings. And same thing happened with awesome, which then got shortened back to awe, to have a polar opposite meaning of its original intention. Blundering is the close ones. I thrift, remember this th sound. Prosperity, sky, and cloud. Both Danish words, sky meant cloud, scrap meant erase, became sky and scrape, and skyscraper was the name of like a ship with very tall sails, which later turned to its modern meaning of skyscraper. So the word skyscraper came to us directly from the Vikings, which is another fun fact you can share at parties. Awkward became awkward, egg, as you mentioned earlier, became egg. Some of the ways Old Norse has influenced English is because it underwent a change much faster and it underwent much more changes. It lost the case system earlier. And what that meant is that they had to define their word order. Because in languages that are fusional, word order is usually very loosely defined. Because you can rearrange the words however you want, they'll still make sense. For example, let's say the cat was chasing the dog. If I'm in a language where one of those is a subject, one of them is the object, and I can tell by the grammar, I can switch the words cat and dog around. If they have anything to tell me who was doing the action and who had something done to them, I can watch the swap them around. People will still be able to tell that the cat is the one that's doing the chasing and the dog is the one that's being chased. Once you lose those endings, once you lose cases, you don't have this anymore, you have to define a word order. So Old English was actually going to have a different word order. It was moving slowly into the direction of having a subject, then an object, and then the verb. So the cat, the dog, was chasing, which sounds ridiculous to us right now, but it would have made perfect sense if the Vikings, who had already fully undergone a word order change, didn't intervene in time and gave them the word order that we all know and love today.
I think
We should probably wrap up, yes.
Yeah, let's go to the ending section.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Take that from here.
So just for reference, we stopped talking about Old Norse now. We're back to Old English for one tiny little bit. So this is just the entire timeline from the time when the Anglo-Saxons settled to when they unified England once and for all. And to finish off our lecture, I'd like to ask a question. What's left of the Anglo-Saxons? I mean, as we can tell by examples of Old English we saw today, our modern English is nothing like it, and the 7 kingdoms of England have not existed for over 1,000 years. To find the pure legacy of the Anglo-Saxons, we must look beyond England, back to mainland Europe. Firstly, many of the homelands of the original 3 Anglo-Saxon tribes have retained their names. The Saxons came from a coastal region known as Lower Saxony, which is a name that has survived through the centuries and is now today the name of a German province. The Jutes came from Jutland, a name that has stuck through the millennia and remained the name of the main peninsula of the country of Denmark. And if we look closer at the map of Jutland, we can see the place name of the Anglians that has remained, which is this tiny peninsula called Angel. The last, and definitely the coolest of the surviving remnants of Anglo-Saxon culture is a linguistic one. Remember those 3 Anglo-Saxon tribes, the Jutes, Anglos, and Saxons? Well, we have something to confess. This whole lecture we've actually been lying to you, because there's a 4th Anglo-Saxon tribe called the Frisians. The Frisians, who were linguistically and culturally very close to the other Anglo-Saxon tribes, never migrated to England, never settled there, and remained in the cold northern Netherlands through their millennia, while their cousins built the kingdom whose language we now speak. But, unlike their linguistic brethren, the Frisians maintained their pure Germanic language, so much so that when modern English scholars who have learned to speak Old English come over to Friesland and talk to the locals in the locals' modern language, they can understand each other. So Old English and modern Frisian are mutually intelligible. And on that note, we conclude our lecture on the history of Old English. In the next lecture, we will talk about the most important episode in the history of the English language, William the Conqueror and the arrival of French-speaking Normans. Yeah.
Thank you.